Okay, so we'll quickly get started. And I'm just going to start slowly with the introductions while some people are maybe still joining us. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, like with all of our events, these are based on best practices and things we've seen and learned from top-rated freelancers and successful freelancers on the marketplace. But you are at the end of the day in charge of how you run your freelance business. So it's up to you to decide which of the tips that we discussed today and which of the insights and recommendations you want to actually apply yourself, which ones you think that are relevant to you and you want to experiment with. So it's all up to you, but I do think that you'll find quite a lot of useful information today. And with that being said, let's do some introductions. As always, I'll be hosting today's event. My name's Kata. I'm an Upwork ambassador. Professionally, I've also been a freelancer for the past 8 years, and I'm with a background in marketing. And today I'm an enterprise project manager. We're joined today by Nadja Nikolic. Did I pronounce it better this time? Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Who is an Upwork talent success partner. And she's joined us today to give us some tips and insights, and also to go over some proposals, some projects live, and share some best practices of what to do and what not to do. And today we're also joined by a client on the Upwork marketplace, Facundo Apesteguia. How do I correctly pronounce her last? Apesteguia. Facundo Apesteguia, founder of Deepa Solutions. And he's here today to answer some of our questions, to talk about his experience and why and how he uses the project catalog, and to answer some of your questions as well. So as always, we have a Q&A, and I encourage you to ask any client-facing questions you have to get Facundo's perspective on how these things look and work from a client's side. All right, so our agenda, with that being said, is first we're going to talk briefly about what are the benefits of the project catalog, why I think that it's really valuable and people should check it out. Then I'm going to hand it over to Nadja to talk about project catalog best practices, and all the while we'll be asking some questions for Facundo as well, and getting his perspective on using the project catalog from the client side. All right. So why use the project catalog? Well, in short, the project catalog adds another way for our talent to build their business and create new relationships on Upwork. The goal is to give our talent as much flexibility as possible, amplifying their business and creating another avenue for clients to find them. And this is really my favorite thing about the project catalog. It's just basically giving us a different way in which to put our skills and our expertise in the spotlight. It's just a new way for us to be discovered, for clients to learn what our experience is and what type of work we like to do. So some of the key advantages to using the project catalog are, number one, less back and forth with clients. The scope, cost, and price are all set. So this is great, especially for people who do a lot of similar work on a repeatable basis, where this time, you don't have to discuss the project and the scope with every new client and kind of get them up to speed on how things work. You can create a project and they can already learn from there what your process is, what the first steps are, and hire you right away and go through the steps to get work done more efficiently without you having to spend as much time bidding on proposals. It's a more efficient for your workflow. You set the parameters and let clients come to you. You work on the projects you want and how you want because you built them. And most important, you do more of the work you love to do. And here I want to add something, because I've gotten the question many, many times. Is the project catalog better than the traditional way of working through Upwork? Or is the project catalog replacing the traditional way of working through Upwork? And I want to say that, the project catalog works best on a complementary basis. The project catalog and bidding on fixed price and hourly projects work best when you're doing them together. For certain types of projects, you will be the project catalog is a better fit, because if it's repeatable work, like we've said before, you can get started more easily. It's also a new avenue where clients can discover you and learn what your expertise is. And there are still many, many situations in which you're going to prefer to work with clients either on a fixed price or hourly basis if it's an ongoing project. So this is really just a tool to enable you to do the work that you love and that you're good at, in a way that might fit better in certain situations. So it's not either or. I don't think that for some people should use the project catalog and other people should work on Upwork the traditional way. I think that it's really best to work on those things together. And we spoke with Facundo before this call, and I think he has a really interesting insight to share on why it's really important and valuable to set up a project catalog, even if you're not necessarily thinking that you're going to use it very often, and you'll see why. All right. So from the benefits we've just discussed, I'd like to give you all of us listening today, 30 seconds to write which ones sound most appealing to you. And if it's something that I didn't specify, then you can write that in as well. But yeah, just try to keep it brief so that we can also kind of see what are the more common answers we get, and you can put your answers in the Q&A. And just curious to see from your perspective, what are the top benefits that you associate with the project catalog that I've just shared. All right, let's see here. Less back and forth communication, doing work you love. Okay, more of doing work you love, less back and forth, fixed terms, new ways to get discovered by clients, more promotion of your service. Okay, so I see a lot of people are saying either less back and forth and more promotion of your service. Yeah, I would say based on the answers we're getting, less back and forth is the number one that the people are listing. Adding new ways to be found. So I'm glad that people are noticing this. I think this is a major one, adding new ways to be found, because right now, or until now on Upwork, we had our general profile. And on top of that, we had 2 specialized profiles. So that gives us 3 ways to get discovered by clients. We have the keywords that people can find us based on our general profile, and also the ones from our project catalog. From our specialized profiles. But now with the project catalog, we can add X number more ways for people to find us. If we do 3 types of services within our general skill set, then we can now get discovered using keywords for all 3 of them by setting up a project for each on the project catalog. So it's a great thing that you've pointed out. And let's see here. So we're still getting a lot of answers. A lot of people are still saying less back and forth, more efficient workflow. Somebody's asking, I think I've missed something. Where is the project catalog? Okay, so for anybody who's never used the project catalog before, and if you don't even know where to find it in the nav bar, don't worry. At the end of this webinar, I'm also going to share a link to a resources page where you can learn all about it, how to get started, how to set up your first project and everything like that. So wait for that link and you can find out more about it there. Okay, more control over the terms. All right, perfect. All right, so this is great to see. Now we'll move on, and I'm actually going to have the first question for Facundo, which is, when did you start using the project catalog and why?
So basically, we had the luck of being part of the development of this also, because we were involved in several sessions of product management regarding this project catalog. So me and my team basically sent some inputs for improving the process, but we really start to put in focus on this as soon as it was launched, because I think that from the customer perspective, it's a really good thing to have another insight about the freelancer itself, right? We take a look at a lot of things inside the project catalog, and really it gives us like a deep perspective and a different presentation of the freelancer itself.
Yeah, I thought that was particularly interesting from my discussion with you, and it's kind of a good thing for other people to know. I believe that from Facundo's perspective, what's great about the project catalog is that it gives him a more clear idea of what your particular specialization is and how you structure projects and things like that. So that's really interesting, right? Because even if you don't end up working by selling a project on your project catalog, this can still help clients figure out what skills you have and what process, what's your work process, what are the first steps and things like that. So I thought that was really interesting and particularly valuable to people who don't work in super repeatable categories. Like, with logo design, it's really repeatable and the same process for creating a logo. But with web development and web design and things like that, people always want something custom. It's not as repeatable, but it's still a great way for people to showcase what their skill is and what their process is, even if then they just start a discussion with the client and set up either a fixed price or an hourly project. So I thought that was really interesting.
That was why one of my main comments to you was that I don't think this should be done in a hurry way, right? This should be really detailed, because when we look at the project catalog for a particular freelancer, in my company with my team, we check the quality of the images, how they present, what are the words that they use. Also, later you check the profile and you check the portfolio and everything. But this is like, if you would like to say, like a presentation letter, right? And when we were looking, for example, for people that could perform copywriting, you see that there are a lot of people there, and the way that they present to the customer is what makes the change, the difference between other people, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, and then so my follow-up question to you is, how do you think the project catalog is helpful to clients? So you've kind of talked about that already a little bit, but with you, is it now like your go-to solution, or are you still using both the traditional way and this?
Yeah, basically the difference is that I think it's a really good fit for that kind of projects in which you have a fixed price, for example, and you know that you need to deliver a particular scope in a particular time. So when you go into a project catalog, you have the feature to set up really that deliverables. So you will know for which amount of money you will get such deliverables, right? And that's a really great thing for particular projects. It doesn't mean that I will only hire that particular part of the project, right? It maybe happens to us a lot of times that we hire someone for a particular job, and then we ended up with a regular contract of an hourly contract. But that was like the starting point, right? And I think that is the most helpful part of the project catalog. But I just want to remark that it's a presentation letter for us, and we see there the potential of the particular person that we are hiring.
Yeah. And also, what you just said before about people taking the time to do it properly. I think that the huge benefit of setting up a project is that you only do it once versus submitting proposals, which you submit a proposal to every new job, right? So
Yep.
You're only doing this once. So make sure you do it right. Well, actually, you might actually not do it just once. If you didn't do it right, you might find yourself having to redo it or try something different. But yeah, I think that it really makes sense to put in the time and make it as good and professional as you can, because if it's good and it works, then you just have it there. It's there for free, and it's just this new place where clients can continue to find you and to hire you.
Yeah. Also, I think it's a good advantage that you can like show your portfolio in some way, right? All the portfolio of services that you can provide as a, I don't know, front-end developer, designer, a copywriter, whatever, you can put everything there, and you can attract different customers from different industries at the same time, for different kind of jobs, right? Because as a designer, you can do logos, you can do, I don't know, brochures, you can do a lot of things. And the main thing is that you can put each service that you dedicate to in that project catalog.
Yeah, agreed. And all right, so my final question for this section for you is, what factors contribute most to how you basically select which project to purchase?
Basically, I think it's as I mentioned before, we not only focus on people that can show things, like for example, designers or copywriters and things like that. I think that each freelancer should have the project catalog in order to introduce to the customers. And then based on that, you can select for a particular project. But most of our hires regarding that was for social media management, because you there can see how they manage things, where the quality of the posts that they create, the copywriting skills, also for copywriters, and more on the visual side. So for also for developers, it's a good thing that they can put in some way their portfolio there, like their project catalog, with some images that captivate the particular customer that is looking for that. But really, we don't have a specific project, but we always try to filter by there first before inviting to a job or something like that. We always try to look there first and see the quality of that project catalog, and based on that, it doesn't matter for me if it's a person that is new in the platform. I just look for the quality, and I just try to filter by that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good one to then transition to before we transition to Nadja. But this part about, I think the project catalog can really be useful for people that are new to the marketplace, because even though you don't have past projects necessarily, or many past projects to reference how good you are and how your experience was with clients, you have this this particular section of Upwork that is designed to help you basically showcase clients exactly how you work. So that shows them that you do have a process in mind, that you do have experience with what you're doing. Even though you're new to the marketplace, you probably have some prior experience to guide you how to create something good. So this can be a good starting place for people who are new to Upwork, to just set up, what's the service? How do you provide a particular service in terms of process? And what's your past experience, even outside of the marketplace, that just gives clients an idea of overall how long you've been doing this for and how well. And you actually, I will just say this before we move on to Nadja. You actually mentioned before that you prefer sometimes to not work with people that have huge amounts in earnings on Upwork, in a really profile with a lot going on. But you sometimes prefer working with people who are newer, particularly because you want to pick somebody who is I believe the reason was who has more time, right?
Yeah, really. We have in some cases we have some tight deadlines. So what happens to us is that if we hire someone that has, I don't know, 25 jobs at the same time, it's quite difficult to get prioritized by that particular freelancer. For projects that has maybe more suitable deadlines, we select those. But the rest of the time, we as a company, we always try to give a chance for the people. For example, my main developer actually on the company, and my engineer lead is basically a person that I started with him when he was zero earnings. Our copywriter expert started with a zero earnings also, and right now he's top rated plus. So we try to give them the chance to start from scratch and grow up in the platform. We don't try them to have a tight relationship with us. We always just ask for a deliverable, and they can look for other customers. They can have other stuff that they are working on. So we try to help them on those things if they are blocked or whatever. So we try to make the freelance people grow up inside the Upwork community, right?
Nice. I think a lot of people are going to be maybe relieved to hear that, because something that I always a concern that I always hear from people who are new even if they have a lot of work experience, if they're new to the marketplace, the concern that I hear is, how do I, how do I compete with a top rated plus freelancer or an expert better freelancer that has 100% and 100, plus projects behind them and things like that? And the simple answer is that you really don't have to quite as often as you think, because freelancers who are top rated plus, etc., they, most of the times, like myself, I'm pretty much always booked, and in the short times that, like, I think in the past 2 years, I've bid on 5 projects or something like that, like I don't need projects every day or every month. So you're not actually competing with people who are doing really great on the marketplace, because they probably most of the times already have their schedules fully booked with clients, right? So you do very much have a chance of getting picked and getting hired, even if you're new to the marketplace. You just have to really work on how you present yourself, how you put your best foot forward, and how to make sure that you're providing a service that clients really need and can really use. And with
Yeah.
that being said, it's now time to talk a little bit about project best practices. And here I'm going to hand it over to Nadja.
Thank you, Kata. So we are going to cover a little bit about, some of Project Catalog best practices, and definitely I'll show you a few examples. Facundo, also have a couple of questions for you. I'm really interested in what your thoughts are on these, but I just want to clarify something up front. So we're not going to show how projects are created step by step, but as Kata mentioned at the very beginning, we are going to share some resources with you guys so you can learn how to do this step by step if you're completely new either to Upwork or to Project Catalog. And with that said, I'd like to show you a little bit of just how, I think this was also one of the questions, how you can look for projects. So this can either help you understand a little bit more about what's out there, learn what clients see when they search for projects, right? And then it can just really be a good way to get inspired by others. So if you haven't checked it out, you can basically log into your independent professional account, and under search box, you can simply click on the little arrow pointing downward, and then select projects instead of jobs, which is probably what it's currently set to. So you can really see what other projects are out there, how other people kind of organize them, what they are offering, right? And just play with it, and start thinking about, what projects you'd really like to create and offer. So with that said, I'd like to ask you, Facundo, just a quick question. So you did speak a little bit about how you basically use Project Catalog, but I would love to learn a little bit more about what types of projects do you prefer to purchase from the Project Catalog, because I know you mentioned that you also use Project Catalog basically to kind of maybe source for talent a little bit more, to learn about their process, and then eventually, with some of them start contracts, right? So I'm curious to see what do you feel Project Catalog is most helpful with when you want to actually purchase a project there?
I think the Project Catalog is more useful for people that do visual stuff, that do content writing, branding stuff. Like I think that you can use like in different ways, but the main projects we hire from the Project Catalog were designers for particular projects. We hire social media marketing people or social media management people. But for example, regarding marketing, copywriting, and all that stuff, we always go first on the Project Catalog, because it's like a good way to see the quality of the things that they post there, how they introduce themselves. It's a really interesting. I take the time to see the introduction of each one, see what are the deliverables itself. I think that's a great feature. And for the fixed projects that you have with customers, it's a great thing to be able to outsource a part of it to a freelancer and give them the chance to like grow up and start ranking in the Upwork community.
Sounds great. So this actually brings us to something we've been kind of wanting our audience to do today. So I'd like to basically give everyone maybe like 30 seconds, and you and I, Facundo, we can keep talking about this. But the question really is, if you were to create just one project after our workshop today, what would that be? And so here are some examples and some ideas that are just, you know, here to kind of help you start thinking about it. And I know that we are focusing a little bit more now about design and creative and sales and marketing and consultation type of projects. But some of these things and tips that you're going to see today are really helpful regardless of the field of expertise that you have. Now that I'm kind of also, now that we're also talking about these types of projects, one thing that kind of comes to my mind is something that I see as a common mistake. And I'd also love, Facundo, if you wanted to comment on this, but I do see that a lot of times talent try to use some generic descriptions in their titles, and they'll include words like professional or cool or detailed, awesome. And so while I think this is completely fine if you use it in your project description, I'm not sure how helpful it can be when clients are searching for the project they're interested in. So I feel like it's always best to keep it very precise and very specialized, so that the clients do understand what it is that you can provide with this project. But Facundo, I'm really curious to also hear your thoughts on this, if you want to share.
Yeah, of course. Basically, I think that the most important thing is when we look for a particular freelancer, it doesn't matter which of these things we are looking for. First, we filter by like what is the rate that we can pay, right, based on the project that we have. Later, we check about the maybe the feedback from other customers if they have, but we also include the rising talents and the people that doesn't have like reviews yet. And we really check about, I think the first presentation from the project catalog is the images that you put there. The images are, it really can say a lot about you. Without even, because if you think about it, is a square in which a customer is checking your job, right? And
Yes.
Putting generic images that you can find in Google is not a thing that it can attract to me, at least to me or my team in particular, right? We look for quality, handmade stuff, things that you know that it comes up from that particular freelancer and not just from Google, like saying, okay, I get the best Instagram post in the world. But when you see the quality of the other images, there are like images that you can find over internet. And I think you should give this the correct value of showing who you are, what is the quality of your job or your deliverables that the customer will have, and basically show who you are. I think that's the most important thing. It doesn't matter too much what kind of words you use. It matters because if you go for marketing, you will not put another thing, but you can put anything relating to marketing, and you will be filtered there, right, in that list that you're searching for.
Yeah, so this is a great segue to something that I've been also meaning to highlight before we kind of go over some of the project examples and additional best practices. But as you all might already know, or if not, this is a great way for you to kind of find out when you are creating your project, you have to actually set the project category, right? In order for even your project to get published. So it's important to select the right one, but then you also have the opportunity to kind of add project attributes, and you can actually see that in next slide. It's just taking a second to load. So what these project attributes will look like, basically you can select up to 5 optional search tags. So these optional search tags aren't visible to clients, but it can help with further categorizing your project and appearing in relevant search results. So do think about this. And so in the light of our event today and talking a little bit about and writing down our ideas for what we'll do after the event, I do want to ask you, just based on the project you came up with like moments ago, think about a few tags you would use. And so in the next slide, you can see some obviously examples, but try to be creative, try to think about any keywords that are relevant to your project. And so, here's a little hint, and I know you, Facundo, said as well that basically, aside from obviously checking project catalog, you'll check also someone's profile, and how we have those skill tags in profile. Obviously, we can select a little more there, but basically think of these optional search tags as, skill tags or keywords that you would use throughout your profile or potentially portfolio, and try to include them here. And so with that said, I would like to maybe go over some additional recommendations before I show you a few examples. And so as I had previously mentioned, we are focusing a little bit more on design and creative and sales and marketing. However, these tips are really for anyone who's on project catalog, who's looking to either improve their projects, create more projects, or simply get started with it. So first off, we started to talk about, what makes a good title good, and good titles are often very precise, specific, also well formatted, and probably not too long. And you see, we have 3 examples here. So it's also, I guess, a personal preference what you would want to go for. But if you look at the first one, that says you'll get a unique logo concept, it's not something that tells you a lot about what the what the maybe particular style is, or what the project is really about. And then you have another one that is a little bit longer, right? That says you will get a creative and minimal logo that portrays professionalism, which is totally fine, but still, if you look at probably the third one, this one would be more precise, even though it's not as long. That says you will get modern logo with 3D mockups. Still, whenever you're kind of creating your projects, do try to error check. And I can suggest using Grammarly.com, which is a free Chrome extension. But if you have any other way that you do this, it's totally up to you. Also, when you are thinking about creating your project, maybe it's so you can select, whether you want to have 1 tier or 3 tiers. But I feel like selecting 3 tiers is always something that provides more options for the client, and it's kind of easier for them to customize what they would like from you. Also, something that, and we will talk a little bit more about this in particular throughout our examples and a little bit later, just because I feel like a lot of times independent professionals don't focus as much on the project steps and project requirements. And so the requirements should be really clear and precise. So you really want to make sure the client understands what you might need from them in order to get started on the project, but you still don't want to overwhelm the client if you don't really need something from them. So try to find this balance of what you really need and be precise about it, because not all clients might understand what you need to get started on the project. And I feel like Facundo has highlighted this quite well, but it's really valuable for you to kind of show visually your, most appealing work examples, things from your portfolio, maybe, projects that you're most proud of or that really showcase your skills well, but don't feel the pressure to include everything you've ever created. Just because when clients kind of look at the project, they also see snippets of your profile, and then they have a link to your profile and a link to your portfolio, which is where they can check for a little more work than what you might have included in the actual project gallery. Also, just a quick tip, and then I can actually share my screen and show you some of the examples, but try to avoid any clickbaits or offering free work. And with that, I'll share my screen. I'll show you just a few examples. We're not going to go over each of them step by step and do an entire review, but it's good for us to kind of see some of these things that we just spoke about and that we'll continue to talk about. So we already commented on this project's title, which says you will get a unique logo concept. And so it's great that Bilal tried to include, so he offered actually 3 service tiers, right, which is perfect. And then he also included a lot of examples in his project gallery that can actually show the clients some of the previous projects he worked on, right? Still, if you look at the project details, it's, in my opinion, showing a lot of information about project, about Bilal, but not so much about what the client is actually going to receive, right? And so it would be great if he kind of highlighted a little bit more about what is really his value, how he can help the client instead of focusing just on himself. And then he did include quite a few frequently asked questions, which is always great so that clients have a way of learning a little bit more about maybe some of the questions they have up front. And it's going to really reduce the amount of back and forth communication needed before the client decides to purchase the project and before you get started on it. And then obviously with the requirements, he was very particular about what he needs from the client, and then what the actual steps are with the descriptions and everything, which we'll see that it's not always the case, but it can be really helpful. And moving on to our next example, also within the logo design category, that is about getting a creative and minimal logo that portrays professionalism. Well, in this case, we already commented on the title a little bit, but when it comes to the description, I'd say it's a lot clearer than the first one. It's a little bit better organized. However, one thing that the independent professional is talking about is being affiliated with an agency. And then, in my opinion, it would be even better if he tried to make it a little bit clearer about who would be really working on this project, who the client would potentially be communicating with, and who might be other people who'd be involved, as long, in case you're working with a team. Again, we see the frequently asked questions section, and then as you can see, something we spoke about, you can actually see the snippets of Mian's profile. So you can click here and see their profile, or you can click here and see the portfolio, so clients can always learn more about it if they're interested. And then moving on to our third example, which is obviously a little bit of a different type of project, where the independent professional still decided for 3 tiers. But in this case, he's offering a consultation related to TikTok or Instagram here. And so my thoughts are that, because obviously this is a little bit of a different type of project, might not be super visual in terms of what the work is about, but he still tried to include, in my opinion, an interesting project gallery that kind of captures one's attention. And I feel like he was quite clear and simple about what the client is going to get, about how he can really bring value. And one thing, obviously, in this case, because it's a little bit of a, let's say, not really a simpler project, but there aren't many things that can, there isn't something that you can really do here to further customize it. Perhaps you could include some add-ons. And so when you're basically adding add-ons, you can either go for some really simple ones, like, different number of revisions or a fast delivery time, or you can come up with any custom ones that you feel would be helpful for your project. So one thing to think about here, and this is something that I really wanted to highlight today, we did talk about the optional search tags and we did talk about the selecting the right category. But when you are selecting category for projects like this one, you can actually go for consultation category. And so it's up to you which category you really want to go for, whether you want to keep it under some other category. If, let's say, your project is more related to, let's say, design or social media management. However, then try to balance it out with using, relevant search tags that can actually point to this particular field. And with that said, I'd like to show one last example, and we can continue chatting with Facundo. So this is basically another consultation project for, in this case, related to digital marketing. And so the freelancer here only selected one cover image, which is potentially, not something that shows so much of what their individuality and personal, what their work experience is. But they did pick a pretty precise title and then kind of explain a little bit more about, what the project is all about. And they did include some additional things to help clients kind of select which package to really go for. So in this case, one thing that I feel is missing here is frequently asked questions section. And you can really keep it simple, but always try to kind of, from your point of view, think about what are the types of questions you'd ask if you were the client, or if you already have experience working with, let's say, fixed price projects and similar projects, right? Try to think about the questions you normally get asked from your clients. And then lastly, if you look at the requirements and the steps, it's not really clear what happens from the beginning until the end. And I can actually stop sharing now and talk a little bit more about these things like requirements and steps and additional best practices. And then we can move on. But what I want to kind of highlight here is it's a very common mistake to see that independent professionals tend to kind of include requirements within the steps, just because when you're kind of creating your projects step by step, the first thing you'll actually do is you'll talk about the project steps. So you'll fill out what steps you are basically going to take from the very beginning of the project until the very end, until you basically deliver the final product. But then you're prompted to create and to kind of include what your requirements for the clients are. And so I understand how this can appear a little confusing, but try to avoid including the requirements within the steps. And more importantly, try to be really clear about what the steps are. And the steps are what happens after you actually get what you need from the client and after the client has fulfilled the requirements. And also something that I'd like to remind you all of is to kind of keep this client perspective in mind. So when you are talking about what your project is all about, when you're writing your description, when you're thinking about the questions, the requirements, the steps, really think about the client and try to kind of include and tell them, how you can add value and what is your project really solving for the client? How are you helping the client with your project? Once again, don't forget to think and to use the optional search tag, especially if you are offering a consultation type of project. And as I said, try to include also the add-ons so that clients do have an ability to kind of customize your project a little bit more, and you can select any custom ones you want, or simply go for the ones that are already offered to you. And with that said, we can actually now go back to talking to Facundo.
Yeah, before we do that, there's actually a question that we got that I think is very good and tied to what you were just saying, which is from somebody saying, I'm facing another problem with deadlines. For example, the project duration is 2 days, but if the client doesn't submit the design, so his requirements within 3 days, will there be any impact on my job success for the deadline? And the answer to that is
okay, so that's a very specific one. These things are often best discussed with our support team. But basically,
so I think more generally though, I would say that the way to think about this generally is this person is saying that it took, he set a duration of 2 days for his project to be complete, but it took 3 days for the client to send him what they needed. So the
yeah,
clock
so
only starts ticking.
after
Go on.
the client has, yeah, exactly. So the clock starts ticking after the client has submitted the requirements. But if you don't really hear back from the client within within, I think 24 hours, no, yeah, within 24 hours, you actually can cancel the project without having like your job success score and your reputation affected. So this is something to also keep in mind if you're not really, hearing back from the client. And also, it's kind of an additional way for you to think like, do I really want to be working with this person? And, have we really agreed on everything as we wanted to before we move forward? So, but still, it's often best to reach out to the support team about these types of challenges that you're having, just to be safe.
All right. And we also have a question that I think is a good one for you, which is somebody's asking, is it possible to highlight some mistakes that newly set up Upwork accounts make with the project catalog? Now, obviously, you've went through some of them, but if you were to choose like the top 3 again for people to, as a summary, what would you say they are?
Okay. We did talk about these, but I can definitely summarize it. Top mistake is probably choosing the wrong category, which can also sometimes result in your project not being approved initially, right? Until you make the change needed. A lot of times, independent, especially new ones, make a mistake of not including the optional search tags because they don't have the experience of necessarily thinking about, where they can find these. What are the ones that are available? And so we did the little practice here and basically start to think of them as your skill tags or most relevant keywords to describe your project and to further categorize it. So this would be the second one. And then the third one definitely and by far would be kind of not being clear about the project steps or including the project requirements in the project steps, which is not necessary. And I'd add a fourth one here, and this is, if your work is visual, not including relevant work examples there, or if your work's not visual, going for something, still making sure that you do choose something that showcases your personality, that kind of matches what the project is about, and really just shows to the client more of how you operate.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that. All right. And I think we can move on now to your question for Facundo.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you, Facundo. So, what do you basically expect to see from an independent professional in relation to a project and how they work? So when you open the project catalog, you did mention how much you value a good project gallery. But then when you're potentially looking at, let's say, project description or project steps and requirements, what it is that you're really expecting to see there?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, it should be which deliverables should will I get basically. What are what is what you need from me and what I will get from you. That's the two questions that I make every time I go inside that. And as the first principle of each marketing thing that we made is that the customer is first. So we already got like an introduction, or we can switch to your profile to see more information about you. I think on the project side, it would be better to focus on what the customer will get, right? Like a direct message to the customer. And the reality and the most important thing is that you should put what you are good at, right? It doesn't, it is not a thing about having a lot of services. It's just a thing about making good what you do best, right? And that's the main thing. If you are dedicated only to logos, just post the 3-4 best logos that you made, and And you can put also a photo of you, like presenting yourself. It's a great thing, I think, in the profile, also in the project catalog.
Yeah, we
But
had one example, I think, with the
yeah,
independent professional doing right that.
yeah. And I think that for social media management, that's an important thing too. And be clear about if you're part of an agency, it's really important to be clear who will be doing the job. If
Yes.
it's you, if it's something from your team, it's and you will be responsible for that. Like the most transparency that you can have with the customer is the best thing, as I do with my company. Is transparency is the first thing.
Yeah,
I think that's the main things.
that's
Yeah.
such an amazing tip, and thank you for sharing all this with us. And I think that based on the examples we reviewed, and also everything Facundo shared with us today, would like to ask you to take additional time now to maybe just write in the Q&A session at least one takeaway you would apply to your project from everything we just talked about. It doesn't necessarily have to be what we've shown here. These are just some recommendations, something that we will want to remind you of, but we would love to learn a little bit more about what is your key takeaway. So let's see. Okay, so someone says to create a project in Project Catalog. This is great. Focus on the client need. Adding more projects to provide what customer will get. Focusing on the value the client will receive. Being precise, being clear, being specific. Adding more images of what the independent professional is doing. Focusing again on what value they can bring. Mentioning what the deliverable is really clearly. Okay, well, these are all really great responses. I love them. And we can just kind of go over really quickly of some best practices once again. So if you're just getting started, keep it simple, start small. And as also Facundo said, think about what you're really good at and focus on that. Try to also look for some inspiration. It's really fine if you don't know what Project Catalog looks like, if you don't know where to get started, try to search for some projects within your field of expertise to kind of understand what you can do. Also experiment with search tags. We talked so much about, the importance of including these optional search tags, but if you see that they're not working, feel free to change them, feel free to, test them out. But do keep in mind that every time you'll make an edit to your existing project, they will undergo the process of review once again. And, don't take more projects that you can really comfortably handle. So you can have 20 active projects at the time, and you can also kind of manage your availability and make sure that if you're not available, you turn your projects off, and if you are available, you turn them on. And definitely last, but probably the most important one, and in the light of today's event, is to really keep the client perspective in mind. So always try to put yourself in clients' shoes. Okay, and I guess we can maybe move forward and continue answering some of the questions we're getting.
Just one
right.
thing I would like to mention is
Yes.
the point number 4 that you mentioned about learn how your client think is like, I think that the most important thing to attract a new client, right? There are a lot of places over internet to understand how a particular industry thinks about the service. So if you can dig in that and you can put like a really good presentation from yourself, it will be like everything you need.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
100%.
And as we move on to the Q&A, I also want to share with you. So we have a bunch of links here. One way to access all of them is we've basically put them all on one community thread on Upwork. So you can access this from your phone by scanning the QR code you see on the bottom right. And I'm also going to share now in the chat a link that you can access from your computer to see all of the links mentioned here. And now we'll be taking more questions if you still have them. I have one that I've been waiting to answer because it's been a recurring one. But feel free to add in more questions that you have for either Facundo, Nadja, or myself, and we will answer them for the next few minutes. And in the links, you'll learn more about how to create a project, how to set your requirements, how to manage your project, pro tips on how to build your project, getting paid for fixed price contracts. You'll learn a little bit about that as well. How to add picture perfect images and video, and a step-by-step webinar. All right. And I wanted to address this question because it's kind of been recurring, and it's been recurring in different formats. But the question was, what kind of images should copywriters use? And I also had all kinds of variations of this question. What kind of images should content writers use? And generally, people who aren't doing very visual work. And my recommendation here is, on one hand, you can, as we've discussed, maybe put a picture of something like that's just more generally applicable, like either a picture of yourself, or you can put a picture that just highlights some of your best testimonials, or something that I think is useful. Maybe take a screenshot of some content that you've written or something that you were involved in, and make that look nice and put that in your project catalog so you can give people some samples basically of what you're doing. So regardless of what you work in, you can kind of think, we also got questions like from an SEO perspective, how do I use the project catalog to highlight my past work? Well, one of the ways to do that is you can take screenshots or create infographics around, what results you had or statistics you can showcase from past projects. Just make sure you're allowed to share those, and you can put those in your project catalog. So really use those images creatively in whatever way works for you. You don't have to make it a super complex thing. You can just make something custom that works for you in your case. Thank you so much, Nadja and Facundo. Thank you so much both for joining us today, for sharing from your experience and how you do things and best practices.
Thank you. Bye.